Thanks everyone for coming. If I had known this many people would be here, I would have had a designer do my slides instead of me, but instead you get my Google Slides and screenshots. Rajiv gave me a great intro, but just a little more on my intro. I currently lead partnerships at Coda, which is an all-in-one doc for teams, similar to, a lot of people describe it as Google Slides, Sheets, and Docs in one. We're trying to basically solve the problem of tons of different solutions and trying to bring everything from spreadsheets to word processing into one single surface area. Prior to that, I was in BD and partnerships at Zapier, where I worked on strategic alliances. Some friends from Zapier are here in the front row. Working with Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Before that was at Google, working on channel and BD partnerships for G Suite and Box, where I led security partnerships along with a bit of work on telcos and referral programs. Also do a little advising on early stage startups, and for those of you who are in tech partners, one of the things I learned was there's still not a lot of technology. There's some good solutions now, but there's not a lot of technology for tech partner managers, and so I built something that I think really helps. I'll share it with folks after this, but what I call the Partnership OS, which I naturally built in Coda. A little bit about what Coda is. I mentioned what the doc is, kind of the product, but used by 25,000 teams, a couple million users. We're still pretty early. This number, I rounded it up. It's definitely growing as a company. We're not like a brand name yet. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is 0 to 1 stuff. It's not huge partner programs and channels. It's not, I'm a brand name and I want to go launch a new product. We very much had to kind of fight tooth and nail for every person that joined our ecosystem, and I think hopefully that's relevant to a lot of folks here. From what I've heard, it certainly is. Partnerships at Coda entails a pretty wide ranging from packs, which are essentially our version of integrations, taking third-party products and translating them to our building blocks of tables, buttons, etc. Strategic integrations. We've done partnerships in the last year with Slack, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Our product's really complementary with those, so trying to be alongside these partners that have huge user bases. Service partners, we've got a couple. Brian is here in the audience, who's I'm going to talk about in a minute, but partners that have kind of really got the vision of Coda and are helping other customers see it. And then lastly, affiliates and referral partners. We actually rolled out Partner Stack in February, which has been a great experience. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So tech partnerships specifically as a bucket of that, there's a few things. There's the packs, which you can see here, just like an example of a pack that pulls in Figma data, lets you then mark that up with tasks and people that are involved and send that out to Slack. So it's just a bunch of different ways to, widgets in Coda that let you translate third-party functionality. And then our integrations that we go build on other surface areas. So certainly I think Francois actually covered a lot about strategy around going to build on other surface areas. My approach is going to be more about how do you get other people to build? How do we go from 0 to 1,000 developers for a platform that didn't exist until October of last year, for a platform that is not on a first name basis with most people? So I'm going to start with 3 things that I used to believe about technology partnerships, and then I'm going to knock each one down from what I learned at Coda. The first is that you have to build momentum and a business case and have a ton of developers before you hire a team. The second, you need really big name partners to make a launch splash. And the third is that you should measure success by the number of participants in an ecosystem, number of integrations, number of partners, etc. Starting with the first one, I want to talk a little bit about hiring. So when I joined Coda, I was the first partner hire. The company was around 75 people, mostly product and engineering, like 1 sales rep, 3 marketers, pretty small in general outside of product and engineering. And so my thinking was, I'm going to spend like a year at least just figuring out what there is to do with partnerships, figuring out where there's product market fit, figuring out if we have legs for channel partnerships, if we have legs for a developer ecosystem, and then we'll hire around that. We'll hire on the areas that have generated enough critical mass and interest. My second week there, the CRO at Coda basically said, that's a cool plan, but what if I told you could go hire 3 people right now? Like, capital is not an issue. We had just raised a Series C. Tell me what your plan would be if I said you can hire 3 people tomorrow. And so I did that. So you can't read here, but basically what I did was break down what are the hires that I think would be most valuable for this team, ranging from developer advocate to service partner managers, platform around the SDK we were launching, technology partner managers for the big ones like Slack and Zoom, operations, because I learned from my time at Zapier that a great partner ops hire can save your team hours upon hours of time a week, and partner product marketing, which has become one of the roles I feel strongest about in standing up an ecosystem. And I basically broke it down, what I'm currently doing in each of these areas, what an FTE could be doing if we hired them, and what that would let me do for the partnerships team at Coda if I had that time freed up to go build other things because I could trust that we hired a great person for this. So Francois mentioned this about Typeform. They're actually an inspiration for us. They hired developer advocacy long before other roles. And that's what we did. We went out and said the first role that we're going to hire and the highest priority is developer advocates, because we had this idea that there was a platform in Coda, we just didn't know what it was yet. And we thought that if we got in the weeds and spoke the language of developers, we reached them where they were, we built the tools and documentation that they cared about, they would help guide us to what the platform could be. And as much as I would love to say I'm technical, I'm not enough to have those conversations. And so we ended up hiring somebody who built developer relations for AppScript at Google, and that was such a great comparison to what we were trying to do, because as much as we wanted to reach enterprise developers and other SaaS partners, we wanted to make it accessible to anyone as well. And so for me, I learned I don't need 1,000 developers in the ecosystem to hire somebody to manage them or to speak to them. In fact, I don't think we would have gotten to 1,000 developers had we not hired that person first. So obviously, capital and headcount, it's not unlimited, and there's trade-offs and things to make. And so things like this, where you go through and make out the case to your leadership of what could be done and how you could stretch with the right people, is really important. But one of the coolest things about hiring this person, they brought an ecosystem with them. If you can hire the right person, you can't. I wish my screenshots were better, but basically this says, Joe from our community knows Eric, the developer relations person we hired, from his work at Google, and said Eric's work at Google made developer magic accessible to non-developers. And so that was so cool to see, because it meant not only were we hiring somebody who had this expertise, they were bringing a community with them. They brought developers. They brought that name brand recognition for the space that they had established themselves in. And that's the bar we aim to hit with every person that we add to this team is, do you have your own brand? Do you have a community around what you do, whether that's service partnerships, partner marketing? I love hiring people where somebody reaches out and says, great hire, like I know this person. And I think it's a type of problem you have to frame to them of, you'll get to own this space. Like, we're hiring ahead of where the plan is, and that's a little bit scary, but I think the right people will self-select and grow into the role. And so since we hired Eric, he shored up our documentation. He built a Slack community for developers. He built a bunch of test cases and sample docs and things that people could build. He sat one-on-one in office hours with countless developers, and we ended up going from 2 developers in the ecosystem to over 1,000 that are actively building on our platform today. And so the next phase is figuring out how we turn that into a program, how we keep them retained, how we get them building. The second assumption I had was that you need really big names to make a splash in launching a technology partner ecosystem. And to a degree, that's true. Press releases get more picked up if you are mentioning Microsoft or Slack. But I think there's sort of many paths to get there. You don't need to convince Slack to build that integration necessarily. There is a bigger community than ever around products and partnerships that are not first party, meaning Coda, second party, meaning Slack. There's the third party ecosystem. And so we found that motivated makers in our community were driving the ecosystem forward in ways that we couldn't have predicted. So Scott he works with Brian, who's in the audience and one of our biggest partners. He was a teacher who started tinkering with Coda in 2017, learned to code as a result of the SDK that we launched. The first line of code he wrote was in our editor. And originally, I come from Box, Google, where our partners are, Okta and Slack, and had never been trained to think about somebody like Scott as a potential partner. But we sat down with him and we thought about, what does he care about? What are his goals? And we started to design some things around the idea of what would resonate with him, and that was getting in front of users, building a brand, building a potential business around services, which he did. And so Scott, on his own, built and shipped 6 different integrations for us in the span of a couple months, including Jotform, and Allie's in the audience. And I reached out to Allie and said, like, hey, we have a Jotform integration, and I've never had that in my career where my first call with a partner is not you build an integration, I build an integration, the standard back and forth. It was the integration's already done, the content's already done. Let's just figure out how to tell that story together. And so now we're working together on ways that we can share the story around what Scott built. And so it's not to say you don't need the Jotforms in your partner program. I think it's really important to have name brand recognition. But there's more untapped potential in these third-party partners than I've ever seen before. People are learning to code. It's cheaper than ever. You have tools like Replit where somebody can run and deploy code in a browser on a Chromebook anywhere in the world. And we should be taking advantage. If they have an interest and a passion around your product, and you can tap them and meet them where they are, they can become huge value adds to your partner ecosystem. And then you can take what they built and go do the traditional co-marketing playbook that Francois mentioned as well. So it's not to say this is the stopgap. Like, I think you still have to go build first-party stuff. You still have to work with big partners. But it's a nice rising tide. When I go talk to Microsoft, they're much more interested by the fact that we have 140 potential integrations in Coda's gallery versus the 20 that we had before we launched this SDK and started working with partners like Scott. The third thing that I thought was true before going into this process was that you need to measure your success by the number of integrations. How many integrations are in your gallery? How many partners are in your gallery? And that is a valuable success metric, but I want to tell the story about this guy, Leandro, who's a similar, like an ace developer, worked at Gumroad for a bit, got really interested in Coda. And Notion is one of our competitors, but we think that there's actually complementary things to the products. We have many customers that use both. And it was really interesting because on the surface, Coda probably wouldn't build a Notion integration. Notion probably wouldn't build a Coda integration, but our community, they're using both all the time. And so this developer that we reached through some of our developer advocacy work, Leandro, pitched us on this idea of, what if I built the Notion pack? What if I built all the content around it, and you just helped me get the word out? And we loved that idea because it gave us somebody who had the expertise of a competitive product, but was also not so tunnel vision on the competitive landscape that he didn't feel like those two things could work together. So that's an insight we got from the ecosystem that we never would have thought of ourselves. Our team wants to think about, how do you import, how do you migrate, how do you get people off of one tool onto another, but your broader ecosystem can bring you insights like, how do you actually imagine these things working together? And what I love about this story is he built the integration, he built the content and the templates that went with it, he drove awareness of it, and then he launched it on Product Hunt, and he actually, I think he got to number 4 on Product Hunt, and if you're not familiar, Product Hunt is where launches really happen, and what ranking you get the day that you launch is super important to kind of both for bragging rights, but also for general awareness and impressions. And he actually did better than our own launch that we had done a month before, this guy from the community. And I love that story. I'm sure there's some marketing folks at Coda that don't like that story as much. But for me, that's fantastic. That means I'm doing my job right. I'm finding these high potential partners that are driving awareness in a way and thinking about the product in a way that we couldn't. So I say all this, and I know you're probably thinking, do my enterprise customers care about this? Like, am I going to close business with the type of work that these people are doing? And what we found is this will get you halfway there. You will still need to think about things like, how do you bundle this into existing tiers in your product? How do you do app and security reviews to make sure that your customers are as confident as if you built that pack yourself? And you still need to build and own some first-party stuff. So this type of flywheel introduces a lot of questions, but I think what we found is by letting our community bring things to us and focus on, I'm going to go build the top integration, I'm going to go build the competitive integration, it lets us think with a much longer time horizon and more transformative things. So I'm able to then say, okay, you've got this covered. I can go talk to Figma about how to take unstructured data from a FigJam board and put it into structured data. The types of conversations I can't have if somebody wants me to build an Outlook integration, and that's what I have to direct my product engineering and partnership resources to. So know that this strategy, one, really matters for 0 to 1. I think, if you're a big brand and you already have partners that are hitting you up about integrations and APIs, probably less relevant. 2, that you have to complement this with a first-party strategy that is well thought out and takes into account the types of things that your community is building. But the end result, 1,000 developers, 140 packs in our gallery compared to 30 when we had to build and own those first party, and a set of partners that are building businesses on Coda. So we set our OKR for this year around businesses built on Coda and the revenue that they generate. And that's the last piece of what I'm going to talk about, which is how do you align incentives with these types of partners this early in an ecosystem? The first is the Maker Fund, which we launched in October. We were actually inspired by MailChimp on this. They did a developer fund in 2020 that generated some really great integrations. We decided to call ours the Maker Fund because we didn't want it to be only developers. We think that Coda lowers the floor in terms of what you can build and that you don't need to be a developer. But we also do want developers, so we said all of these people are makers. We're investing $1 million in them. People can pitch us on ideas that they want to build. And the idea is that we'll de-risk the process of taking your time to develop and build and invest in a technology ecosystem through this fund. But it's a one-time thing. And so we want to be able to then align incentives on an ongoing basis so you care and you keep coming back and you keep improving the integrations you built. You respond to support issues. You talk to customers about feature requests. And so in addition to the Maker Fund, we rolled out a few ways to monetize, both Partner Stack, which we rolled out earlier this year, and we drove 2 forms of Partner Stack. One is the standard referral program, but the second is actually if you create an integration or a doc within Coda and somebody signs up and pays us as a result of that doc and we can track that, we'll pay you based on the amount of revenue we generate. And so this got people really excited, people like Scott and Leandro, as well as some smaller ISVs that were looking for additional revenue streams, because it's one thing to have an affiliate program where you just share a link and people sign up. However, that's hard to convert, I think we learned. We got a lot of free signups through stuff like that, but we didn't see a lot of conversion to our enterprise and team plans. But when we aligned it to the actual creation of the thing, the doc, the integration, then we saw a huge uptick in people building solutions on Coda because they were able to actually log into Partner Stack and see how much revenue they generated from each thing. So if you have a template strategy as part of your integration approach, whether you're Zapier and you have Zap templates or you're Typeform and you have form templates, think about, could you incentivize people to build bundled solutions on your platform that include integrations, that include content, and then align the incentive around them driving distribution for you. The second is straight up monetization as well. So we made the same mistake as Francois mentioned and talked about this as a marketplace for a long time until our CEO said, where's the money changing hands in this marketplace? And then we realized with this pack approach and with the types of partners that we were attracting, monetization actually made a lot of sense. People were building solutions, trying to build businesses. Let's allow them to charge for it and do a standard marketplace, minimize the take rate, and drive people to actually have money change hands in the Coda marketplace from an add-on perspective. And then the last piece is just pure distribution. We have a gallery. It gets a lot of traffic. We have emails we can send. We have a lot of things that these partners care a lot about. And so we try to highlight featured integrations. We try to have a trending section. We try to pull out our most high potential partners and bring them into newsletters and blogs and community posts and things like that. And so that's what a lot of these people care about, especially early on, both ISVs and these kind of individuals. And the other piece is with this gallery, we're able to kind of create this view that Coda does have a thriving ecosystem. When I joined, I was the first partner hire. Like I said, my first thing the CEO said was build an ecosystem. Like, okay, great. Yeah, that sounds super easy to do. But when I thought about it and unpacked, like, what does it mean? What do I think when I think of a thriving ecosystem? It's not just the number. It's, are they trending? Are people using them? Are people talking about them? And so our distribution strategy reflects that. That's why we care more about the trending stuff than the number of installs or highlighting the number of partners or showing that we have thousands upon thousands. We care about what's resonating with our user base, and that inspires the next generation. So my whole approach with technology partners is, in the early days, everyone's strategic, everyone matters. Take the call with anybody who expresses any kind of interest if you're trying to go 0 to 1. You may talk to somebody that's totally outside the band of anyone you've ever worked with, but they can really surprise you with what they can build and the ideas that they have. The second thing that I think is really important when you're going 0 to 1 is to chart out what the five years down the line, if you're really successful, what does this mean? So I said in 5 years, if all of our packs are built by our community, if we've solved the customer questions around, can I use this pack, is it safe, if we've had monetization in place, then Coda is a platform. It's not a company that's, has a product and an integration gallery with 20 integrations. It's a true platform that people come to and think like, the sky is the limit in terms of what I can build and do here. So we're still early, by no means declaring victory, but I think that in the last year and a half, going from 0 to over 1,000, tripling the number of packs in our gallery, seeing people quit jobs to work full-time on Coda, seeing partners spin up agencies and boutiques to go work with clients and custom develop solutions, it's given me enough faith that we're on the right path, and doubling down in a few of these areas can be really helpful. What's my time check? Okay, cool. I'm just gonna power through this, but just showing you a bit like how we manage this and how we did it. The important thing, keeping your whole company on the same page, I thought was really important, because I was making a lot of hot takes and spicy decisions throughout this process, so I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page and felt like they could weigh in input. So I built a pipeline around the partners that I was working with. I created opportunities for each potential integration and partner. I created opportunity briefs for each of those to show the company what each partner was working on. I built out milestone views that people could see. I did this partner rankings thing. I think that was like one of the best decisions I made in terms of, we had a lot of partners to think through, and who we could spend our time with was limited. So we built out like a weighted criteria ranking system, everything from customer overlap to the brand weight that that partner had. How much does that partner care about Coda? How much does Coda care about that partner? And how realistic is it that this is going to happen in the near term? And use that to stack rank all the opportunities. We set up an external inquiries form. I actually took this from Andrew at Hopin, who's here as well, which is the first time I emailed him, I got a form back that said, what's our customer overlap? What are your ideas for an integration? And I love that, because, basically mitigates the first call that you have to have with a potential partner. We all have these calls, and I'll share this, by the way, after. This is all in a template, but then I could stack rank and prioritize and go have the calls that I feel like are really important, and mitigate some of those, calls that we all have that don't really end up going anywhere. And then the last piece was just this opportunity brief thing that we use internally at Coda. I think every company has a different culture around this, but try to have everyone on the same page, because you can't pull off these kinds of transformational things of taking a company into a platform without having everyone on the same page. And I think that's it. If you want to talk more about any of this, nickv@coda.io is my email. Obviously, we did 0 to 1. 1 to 2 is going to be just as tricky and challenging, and would love some folks in this room to be a part of that journey. So reach out if you want to learn more about what we did, if you want to partner, if you have ideas, if you know a better way to make slides and screenshots show up in a higher resolution than I did. All those things would be helpful. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. And I think one point that you mentioned, I think resonates very well with all of us, right? So ultimately, as tech partnerships people, we want developers and people to leave their jobs and do full-time development on our platforms. And that's when we really arrive as a platform. And we've seen that businesses, multi-billion-dollar businesses built on Salesforce, Atlassian, and stuff like that. So I think that's the way to go. And we see that Coda is already on the way to do that. Any questions?
Thanks, Nick. So I'm Franz from Hopin, and I thought this was an incredible talk, and I wanted to ask a little bit about how you sell the value of small one-person developers in comparison to larger strategic partnerships. Because we have a wide range of partners as well, and some of them like are one-person bootstrap companies, and that every dollar they make goes into their pocket, which feels really good for you.
Yep.
But at the same time, like your execs, your leadership might be pushing more for like the Salesforce, the HubSpot, whatever, for brand recognition, but also potentially more revenue for the company. So how do you reconcile that or
Yeah,
show them the importance?
it's a great question. I had some help in that. So when we were thinking about our strategy, we talked to a lot of people who had great ecosystems. Atlassian, first among them, and Jay Simons, who led a lot of the growth and go-to-market teams in the early days of Atlassian, was an advisor of ours. And he said, like, the three biggest partners in the Atlassian ecosystem that are doing $20, $30 million in ARR these days and solving so many gaps that we don't solve ourselves, no one had ever heard of them when we launched. And they were basically unknown entities that were just hungry for whatever business we could throw their way. And they did some really creative stuff. They did basically like created revenue share out of thin air where they sent a lead to a partner, the partner closed it, and then they shared revenue back. They just did a bunch of these like micro decisions that didn't scale. And then they went back to their leadership and said, oh, Service Rocket is actually generating, $500,000 in pipeline, but they had sent those leads. So it's a little sleight of hand, but also I think important to know and sort of tap into the visionary side of your leadership team and say like, yes, these are small partners today, but the partners of Salesforce and Atlassian and the ones that have built businesses, they started small as well. The second thing is, in the case of Coda, and this may or may not be unique, these small partners can still unlock big business. Like a small partner can still build a Salesforce or a HubSpot integration that I can then take to Salesforce and HubSpot and tap into some of that marketing. So when I was thinking about the $1 million fund and running it by our CEO, that was my pitch to him was, I think I can close gaps a lot faster in the product if I have this leeway to go incentivize the ecosystem to build. And then I can take that back to Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera. And a third thing was watching a company grow out of this ecosystem. Like Brian, who's in the audience, runs Super Synchronous, which is basically an agency that helps embed themselves in business processes and helps companies, embeds themselves within companies and rethink their business processes, works on Coda, Airtable, Zapier, automations. And they came from a company just that needed Coda, and a few folks had helped them, and they were like, there's a business here. And we watched them grow, sign customers, bring leads that we had never talked to before. And so if you can double down on like a first set, I don't think it takes that much effort. Like I think you can still have the conversations with the Salesforces of the world while leaning into one or two that you feel have the potential and grow from there. But definitely you have to pitch the visionary side of what this could look like in a few years versus where it is now.
Yeah.
So speaking of pitching the visionary thing, Nick, when you drop your partnership OS, I used to be a head of partner for a number of small startups. We'd be happy to help you try it out because that's what we do. We have a deep conviction as a dev team that Coda represents a new model for scaling cross-functional communications. So for us, this is a bet.
Good pitch.
Hey Nick, Ethan from Webflow. Just wondering how you look long-term ownership with these third-party integrations. At what point do they hit critical mass where maybe Coda needs to take them over or your second party needs to take them over? And how do you manage maintenance and ongoing infrastructure costs?
Yeah, that's a really timely question. In fact, I had a meeting on that this morning, and one of the things we thought through was, like you said, some of these are going to reach critical mass. HubSpot's a great example where a partner built it, and it's really popular. Salesforce has Quip, and we think like HubSpot and Coda is a similar relationship. And what we're thinking there, and haven't solved this problem, by the way, so this is not a definitive answer, is taking this a step further, and you have to play a little bit of kingmaker in your partners. Pick the ones that are doing really well, have the highest potential, have hockey stick growth on your usage charts, and figure out a way to bring them into the fold more. And so for us, what that means is right now we already have this mechanism of bundling a set of packs. So if you want to use the Jira integration, you must be in the enterprise tier. So far, that's only been ones that we've built, but we're starting to think through, what if we included that HubSpot pack in the bundle, shared revenue with the partner based on conversions to that bundle around that integration being used? That's a great incentive. You can pay them on an annual basis to maintain it, or you can do a revenue share piece that keeps it long-term aligned for them to respond to support issues, be responsive to feature requests, things like that. So that's just an idea we have. I think the more general answer would be, think of ways that you can bring it into existing motions that you have, and incentivize the partner to keep making it better. Maybe one day something will be so successful we'll want to take it over, but my preference would always be, let the ecosystem solve the problem, and our job is to help get it in the hands of customers. And if that means bundling it, if that means giving it away, if that means revenue sharing it, figuring out what the incentive is. But it's a great question, and I'll report back in a few months when we make a decision there.
Thanks, Nick. Joel from Unbounce. I'm curious about the dev fund. You kind of mentioned your CEO like being able to get access to it. Was there any like ROI metrics you were able to bring to him early on before you had this going? Was there any research you were able to pull? Was it
Yeah.
just, we got the money, let's do it? How did that
Yeah,
go?
I appreciate you asking that, because I forgot to mention, I know that not everybody can just launch $1 million fund, and we had just raised a D at that point and had some money. Would I be able to get it approved today? I don't know how the NASDAQ's doing as of today, so we'll see. That being said, yes, there was a few things. So one, we had already micro-experimented with it, with like micro contracts of, build this template, you're a builder from our community, we'll pay you, or build this integration, you're a dev shop, we'll pay you. And so we were able to pull some data from that. I think you don't have to go full-fledged $1 million fund right away. You could do like kind of one-off grants or one-off things with your highest potential partners. And so in that, we saw when we did that, and they were able to just focus on building, we were able to plug that into our machinery really easily. And we said, yeah, this person built a template for executive assistants, and that was one of our most popular templates. Or this person built the definitive product roadmap guide with integrations to Figma and Product Board. That was a huge, huge thing in our gallery, top performing. We ended up taking out ads against it. So those micro experiments helped a lot. The second thing that I'll say is this: there's not a huge, nobody's auditing this fund, right? So like if I launched it and I said it's $1 million, I can be piecemeal about it. I can do, $100,000 this quarter, 250. Nobody's asking to audit my book. So I think you can announce it, and I'm not advising you to announce something you're not going to do, but you can iterate on it, you can launch it. You're not necessarily committing to deploying $1 million or $100,000 or whatever it may be right away. One idea I really liked that we ended up adapting later was to take a chunk of it and put it towards a hackathon, and that's a great way to start. Like just basically say like, we have $100,000 in prizes, and the top 5 will get a certain amount, and you can build solutions, content, things like that. There's a platform called DevPost that I've used that has their own list of developers and has done a really great job at driving awareness. And so that's another good test as well. So yeah, figure out like micro tests and ways to deploy it. But the key metrics we looked at were just, of the things that were generated to this program, what converted for us, like what was used as an active install, what was converted to paid, as well as what got picked up in SEO and things like that. And being able to have a couple micro experiments to show those numbers did help a lot. Also, we had an event. Factor is great. We had a big event, and we were thinking, what could punch this up? If our CEO at the end announced we're going to invest $1 million in the ecosystem, that would probably get some coverage. And so I love events as a forcing factor and try to take full advantage of them to get my selfish initiatives done.